Recently, I came across a teaching by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, which said that coronavirus is an examination, showing you how much your mind has become Dharma. So that's what I've been thinking about, of the coronavirus as an examination, showing me how much my mind has actually become Dharma. And when I look back on how my mind responded in the past year, I don't think I did very well in this exam. So I'm just reflecting on what happened and how I worked with it. It was quite strange that when I first read the news about the COVID-19 pandemic, I did not have a Dharma response. My mind actually went to what I'm going to call a public policy response. Just having worked very briefly in the Singapore government, this tiny little country, I have very strong views about what a government is supposed to do. Yeah, when I was just watching the news unfold, I immediately had thoughts about how governments should be responding and how it should be communicating with its people to build trust and, alleviate feelings of fear and take action and, reading what different countries were doing. And then to my great horror, I saw that this was not happening in the US. And I went into tremendous shock. All my expectations of what a government should do for its people were not being met. And I was really upset. This image that kept coming back to my mind was something that happened in the 2006 Boxing Day tsunami that hit much of South Asia and Southeast Asia. And I met a woman who was actually there in Phuket, and she survived. And she had described to me how she managed to evacuate in time to higher ground with her partner. They were there on holiday, it was Christmas holiday, and how they were in a higher place just watching the water recede from the beach. And there were people who didn't know better who actually went close to the beach to go look at the fish that were all flopping on the beach. And, just watching the water swallow up all the boats. Yeah, she was supposed to go out that day on a boat ride, but her partner just wasn't feeling well. So they stayed in, and that saved their lives. Yeah, so they were just standing there watching this happen, and then watching the water come in, and then just watching people hang on to coconut trees for their life and the water come in. So I kept feeling like, in the weeks before the cases really hit the US, it was like the water was receding. And then the Trump administration was like, stay on the beach, have a party. So that's kind of where I went. I just felt so helpless. Like, hey, people have lived through epidemics. There are ways, there are strategies, there are things you can put in place to reduce the impact of the disaster. And then we watched the water come in, one wave after another. And my mind just flipped out. And especially when the news of all this, the racism pandemic broke too, I just broke down and cried on my own, just hid away and just cried. My mind was just so overwhelmed. And so I went into feelings of despair, wanting to escape. I burned out. I think when you're so angry and overwhelmed, it comes out physically. I was just tired all the time. And not knowing what more to do, I became kind of hyper-focused on the one thing I thought would save the world, which was to put all our Dharma activities online. Now! And so I became really difficult to work with, hyper-focused on, what are we going to present online? It's the one thing I know. So I was not very pleasant to live with, and I'm sorry for that. What helped? I think that should be the focus. I think my mind started to turn when a certain memory kept coming back to me. And after a while, I realized, this is some kind of wisdom voice telling me hey, you do know how to deal with things like this. You do have some resource. And it was actually a memory of something that happened when I was a teacher in a public school in my first year. So I had graduated from teaching school with barely any teaching experience and was sent to a very difficult public school. And in the first 6 months, I was basically eaten alive. But in one of the classes, there was a little gang of boys that just like to act up, being 15, And one day I recall I come into the classroom and the leader of the gang is playing with a lighter. And immediately I think, these people are smoking underage. There are laws in Singapore about how old you need to be to buy cigarettes. And so I'm like, I need to get that. This is against the law. I need to report you. So being a rookie, I tell him, give me the lighter. Of course he doesn't. I proceed to try and chase after it. And it becomes like this incredible cat and mouse game where they pass the lighter to each other so quickly, there's no way I could even track it. Everyone thinks this is hilarious. I'm like, somehow the lighter comes back to the leader of the gang, who then stands on a table and tries to set off the sprinkler system. At this point, yes. Thankfully, the classrooms had windows, plastic windows, and the very tall male senior teacher across the hallway had seen what was happening and came over and rescued me. I was so humiliated, you cannot imagine. Yeah. So I had a beef with this child. Yeah, he had really made my life a misery. And, so I wanted to do something and I really didn't like him. And one day I heard that his mother was coming to the school and she wanted to see all his teachers. So I thought, good, I had built up a long case. I had a lot to tell his mom. So we took turns meeting her. And then when it was my turn, I went and she was sitting outside the staff room. To my surprise, I came upon a woman who was weeping. She was just sitting there in tears, crying and crying. So, okay, I couldn't unload my fusillade, so I just sat down and said, what's wrong? And then she proceeded to tell me how her husband had passed away in the past year suddenly of a heart attack. She had been a stay-at-home mom her whole life, and now she had to work 2 jobs in the middle of the '08 recession to try and support her kids, and that her son had actually been the star pupil before I ever came to the school. Yeah, he was topping the class, he was a school leader, he was the head of the soccer team. But of course, once his dad passed away, he just went downhill from there, couldn't deal with the grief, and then was just acting up in all the ways that were a cry for help, really. But she just sat there saying, I've heard so many terrible things that he's done today, and I just don't know what to do. Can you help? So I just sat there and I said, okay, I'll try. I run an extra class on Saturdays. If he wants to come, he can. But I had no relationship with this child. Yeah, so of course, I text him, he doesn't come. Yeah, but I remember that night I went home and it was like the reality of the school environment I was teaching in was starting to sink in. And I just lay in bed and cried myself to sleep. But in the middle of this crying and, just feeling very poorly about the whole situation, I asked myself, why are you crying? And a little voice said, oh, I wish I could resurrect his dad. And then I started to laugh at myself because I was like, that is not possible. It is just not possible. What are you expecting of yourself? And what can you actually do? So I started to laugh in the tears alone in bed. And I thought, your job here is to teach English. That's all you can do. That is what you're trained to do. Yeah, of course, you relate to the kids as best as you can as a human being, but your job is to teach them a skill and help them graduate and, get out of this poverty cycle if you can. But that's all you can do. And that's okay. I don't know, that moment was really clarifying for me, like to see, oh, this is the difference between my personal distress and having a much wiser and more compassionate attitude to the people involved. Like, there's no way I can solve this child's family problems. We don't have a relationship. But you know what? I can do my best for the next batch, the next group of kids who comes. And then that just helped me to figure out where to put my energy. I'm like, I'm not a social worker. I'm not trained to deal with people's complex family issues, but I can show up for the kids every day. I can make sure I'm well prepared. I can do my best to make sure they stay in school. Yeah. So this memory helped me see, oh, I'm falling into personal distress. Gee, it took me such a long time to even clue into that. That, thinking the situation was hopeless or that I was helpless was making me really angry and ineffective, really. I was not actually cultivating compassion. So I turned, of course, to An Open-Hearted Life, which has, I think, a really great chapter on personal distress. And that's what really helped me. So I'm just going to read the 2 paragraphs that where I read at some point last year, I realized, oh, okay, that's what's going on. So it says here, the evolution of personal distress begins with seeing another's suffering as so bad that nothing can be done to change it. Then, feeling their suffering as hopelessly unbearable, our attention turns to our pain at witnessing their misery. We lose the ability to discern what is our responsibility and what is theirs. We feel guilty seeing another person suffer and think we should be able to do something about it. Not knowing what to do to relieve their suffering, we become distressed. We may become angry at the situation or the person, policy, institution, or event that contributed to others' suffering. At a complete loss for any practical remedy, we may stew in depression. Instead of our helping others, they now have to help us. How do we counteract this unhelpful personal distress? Remembering that we cannot control everything that happens in the world helps us to accept the reality of situations that we don't like. Although we aren't able to undo the complex network of conditions that brought about others' misery, we can think creatively about what we can do to lessen their suffering, make it more tolerable, or to reverse its course. Recalling that misery is impermanent by nature, in other words, it cannot and will not remain the same, helps us to put suffering in a realistic perspective. Doing the taking and giving meditation is also beneficial, as is remembering the meaning of actual compassion. We may have learned a number of other effective strategies that help us tolerate distress in our lives. The key is to remember to use them. Sometimes you sit a difficult exam and you go blank. The key is to remember to use them. So this was a good assessment for me to see all the places I still need to keep working on. Certainly to learn to recognize personal distress and how it works with anger much earlier, and to apply the antidotes so that we can actually be resourced and relate to whoever's with us, in front of us, that we're actually able to help with compassion and kindness.